It was hot. One of the hottest summers New York had ever seen. Tension hung in the air like the humidity itself. The city was broke. Crime was high. The son of Sam serial killer was still on the loose. And then, just past 9 p.m. on July 13th, 1977, the lights went out. The entire city plunged into darkness. What happened next wasn't just a power failure, it was a breaking point. Over the next 25 hours, New York didn't just lose electricity, it lost its grip. This is the story of the 1977 blackout and what actually happened, minute by minute, block by block. Let's go back to the moment it all began. Just after 8:30 p.m., lightning struck a Con Edison substation along the Hudson River. Operators scrambled to reroute power, but more lightning hit a second facility, then a third, and one by one, transmission lines shut down. By 9:36 p.m., the entire New York City electrical grid collapsed, and the city went dark. At first, people thought it was a local outage, a blown fuse, a brownout. But then the realization hit. It wasn't just a neighborhood, it was everything. Midtown, the Bronx, Harlem, Queens, Brooklyn. The streetlights went out. The subways stopped moving. The radios went silent. And for the first time in decades, New York City fell into total darkness. There were no cell phones, no internet, no way to find out what was going on, unless you had a battery-powered radio. But even if you didn't know what was happening just a few blocks away. In the Bronx, local businesses began shuttering quickly, but it was already too late. Crowds began gathering around storefronts, especially appliance stores. When the alarms stopped working and the streetlights stayed off, looters moved in. It happened quickly. Someone smashed a window on Southern Boulevard in the South Bronx. Someone else forced open a storefront gate. Then another, and another. By midnight, entire blocks were being stripped bare. TVs, stereos, clothes, jewelry, liquor, food, furniture. Anything that could be carried was taken. Even cars were wheeled out of showrooms. The same thing was happening in parts of Brooklyn, Harlem, and Jamaica, Queens. This wasn't targeted theft. This was collective fury. A flash flood of anger that had been building for years. As groups of people broke into stores, some began setting small fires, either to break through barriers or to distract the police and fire departments. They even set fire to cars parked in the streets. Once a fire started, it spread quickly. The summer air was humid and heavy, but inside those old structures, the heat built fast. Many of the buildings in the affected neighborhoods had old wiring, dry interior walls, and abandoned upper floors filled with debris. It did not take much for a spark to turn into something larger. Some fires were set intentionally by individuals trying to cover their tracks after breaking in. Others were the result of accidental ignitions when people used candles or lighters to see in the pitch-black rooms. Fire crews were overwhelmed almost immediately. Engines were being sent from borough to borough, only to find streets blocked, hydrants tampered with, and crowds throwing debris at the firefighters when they arrived on the scene. By the middle of the night, entire rows of buildings were burning simultaneously. From Bushwick to the South Bronx, the glow of fires became the only light many residents could see. Most of the structures that burned were already in poor condition, and the blackout simply revealed how vulnerable they were. The result was not just a city in darkness, but a city lit by dozens of uncontrolled flames, stretching across multiple neighborhoods that lacked the resources to contain them. By the time it was over, more than 1,000 fires had been set, and nearly 2,000 businesses were looted. Of course, the police were overwhelmed. At the height of the looting, over 3,700 arrests were made. That's more than any event in city history. Holding cells overflowed. Patrol cars couldn't keep up. Radio communications were jammed with non-stop calls for backup. In some places, the police didn't even try to intervene. There were just too many people. Meanwhile, the subways had shut down mid-route. Hundreds of trains were stuck in tunnels. It's estimated that over 4,000 people were trapped underground, with no lights, no air conditioning, and no announcements. Some walked through the tunnels guided by flashlights, while others were stranded. The MTA had no playbook for this. Emergency crews did their best, but the scale was enormous. Up above, elevated subway trains stopped between stations, some even on bridges, trapping riders in sweltering cars. The Roosevelt Island tram froze mid-air above the East River, leaving passengers suspended in complete darkness with only the wind and water below. And at Coney Island, rides that were halfway through their cycles suddenly shut off, leaving people stuck at the top of the Wonder Wheel and perched on the Thunderbolt roller coaster with no way down until workers slowly evacuated them by manual crank, one seat at a time. New York's hospitals were thrown into immediate crisis. Though emergency generators kicked in, not all of them worked the way they were supposed to. Some flickered, overloaded, or failed entirely, forcing staff to improvise in the dark. Emergency rooms were filled with patients who had been caught in accidents or injuries caused by the darkness. Nurses moved through hallways with flashlights, carrying supplies by hand because elevators had stopped. In operating rooms, surgeons continued procedures under portable lamps while assistants held battery-powered lights over the table. Life support machines were prioritized, monitored manually, and in a few cases, kept going by staff who operated them by hand. It was a night when every hospital in the city had to rely not on technology, but on people working through heat, fear, and uncertainty to keep patients alive. In addition, the city morgue in Manhattan had no backup power. They basically had to borrow a portable generator from City Hall to keep bodies from thawing out. Despite the chaos, in some neighborhoods things were surprisingly calm. Neighbors organized impromptu block gatherings where people shared food from their refrigerators before it spoiled. Some communities gathered on stoops and sidewalks, sharing flashlights, water, and battery-powered radios to listen to updates. People helped each other get home. Restaurants and ice cream trucks gave away melting inventory. It's obvious the city did not fall apart entirely. In some places, the blackout brought neighbors together. In others, it tore the fabric apart. By morning, the damage was clear. Entire streets looked bombed out. Storefronts were gutted. Ash floated through the air. City officials called for calm, but everyone knew the damage was already done. Businesses that were barely hanging on were now gone for good. Insurance wouldn't cover everything, and the people who lived through that night wouldn't forget it. The power was restored gradually on July 14th, neighborhood by neighborhood. And when the lights finally flickered back on in Times Square, the city didn't cheer, it sighed. But the scale of the damage became impossible to ignore. The financial cost was staggering for a city already on the edge of bankruptcy. Estimates ranged from $300 million to over $1 billion in damages, factoring in destroyed inventory, burned buildings, emergency response, and long-term economic loss to neighborhoods that never fully recovered. The blackout of 1977 exposed a lot more than a technical failure. It revealed a city on edge, a city where trust in systems had collapsed, where poverty, tension, and powerlessness boiled over the second the lights went out, and it left scars that would take decades to heal. But it also gave rise to something unexpected, because in the months that followed, new music emerged from those same neighborhoods that had fallen into chaos. New sounds, new beats, new names. What was looted that night became the foundation for a new culture. There were suddenly hundreds of new DJs, people who now had speakers, turntables, and mixers because the music stores had been cleaned out. These weren't just stolen goods, but the tools that would go on to change music history. Rap and hip-hop would go on to become one of the world's most influential genres. Many of the DJs and MCs who shaped early hip-hop got their start using equipment that entered their neighborhoods during the blackout. And it seems in a strange and unintended way, when the lights went out in New York, something else was switched on. If you found this story compelling, stick around. There are more nights like this. More moments where the world turned upside down, sometimes in chaos, and sometimes in creation. Subscribe for more true disaster stories from the edge of history, because the next bad day could be just one episode away.